Hi, my name is Alejandra Bovides. I'm a research associate at the University of Glasgow, and today I will be talking to you about mangrove root networks. We know from terrestrial forests that trees are connected through mycorrhizal networks, fungi that are directly associated to the roots of a tree, and through their mycelia they can travel really long distances and connect to the root systems of another tree or many other trees. Through these mycorrhizal networks, trees can exchange resources. It has been estimated that up to 40% of the carbon within a tree might have been donated by neighboring trees through these mycorrhiza. Simply put, a network is represented by nodes and links, and from there it can have different attributes. In this graph, for example, nodes or trees, these are the circles in the graph. The size of the node is the stem diameter of such tree, and the shade of green represents an age class. Sorry about that. And the links that are connecting these nodes are the mycorrhizals. The links can be thinner or thicker depending on the number of mycorrhizal links that are connecting two trees. Now, another attribute of a network is named the node degree. This is, for example, if one tree is connected to 3 different other trees, this specific tree will have a node degree of 3. And from these attributes, we can estimate the average node degree of a whole network, for example. Now, mycorrhizal networks represent indirect root networks, but trees can also form direct root networks, for example, through clonal growth or the formation of root grafts. Natural root grafts occur when 2 roots meet each other and join their tissues. If they have a functional fusion of the cambium, they can exchange resources, and they are of course known as functional root grafts. But this doesn't happen every time. In some cases there is tissue union at some level, but it's not functional. It is not capable to transfer resources. Still, this non-functional graft can benefit trees by providing an extended root anchorage system that increases a tree's mechanical stability. Now, over 150 tree species are known to have root grafts, but for a very long time this process was considered either a random phenomena in nature that had no benefit really for trees, or had a negative effect on them because it can also increase the risk of pathogen transmission. The only benefit that was never denied or always accepted, so to speak, was an increased mechanical stability for grafted trees. But increasing evidence from recent research suggests that root grafts can even be an adaptive strategy that increases tree fitness. For example, dominant trees can transfer carbohydrates to more shaded, suppressed trees. And when they are grafted, trees are less affected by butworm outbreaks, or they can recover faster from them. Even increased growth rates have been reported for grafted pine trees when the grafts are fully formed and functional. So this is suggesting that root grafts are a vector of cooperation. But so far, most studies have confronted huge challenges. For instance, root systems are quite difficult to access, and it requires extensive excavations to uncover the root networks. That has limited studies to very small plots and to comparing only pairs of trees in terms of root growth or resource exchange or pathogen transmission. So questions such as what are the ecological implications at the forest scale, or do root graft networks change with environmental stress, has remained an open question until now. To address these questions, mangroves represent an ideal model. This is for several reasons. One of them is that there are zonation patterns given by a salinity gradient. And we know that salinity causes a physiological drought stress in trees, so even though the system might be flooded, the water is not easily available for the trees because of the salt it contains. But also, mangroves develop in very soft and anoxic sediments. So being soft makes them much easier to follow root systems without extensive digging. And the anoxia results in very shallow root systems. So roots are not developed very deep in the vertical layers of the soil, but they are very shallow, no more than 30 centimeters of depth. So we were able to develop a simple method to follow the cable roots of the mangroves using a portable Doppler or X-sounder and a set of steel rods. So we can follow from the color of a tree a cable root and see if it leads us to the stem of another tree. We did this in a mangrove located in the central Gulf Coast of the Gulf of Mexico that is well arranged because the communication, the inlet from the Gulf of Mexico with salt water is located at the extreme northern point of the lagoon, whereas the freshwater inlet comes from the southern extreme of the lagoon. This provides an annual round salinity gradient increasing from south to northward direction. And within 8 plots we were able to map all trees and their root connections. So these 3 plots out of 8 are the ones representing the lowest, the mid and the highest salinity concentrations in the range between 30 parts per thousand up to 60 parts per thousand. And somewhere in the middle we have between 400 and 600 trees per hectare, being the minimum 300 and the maximum 900 trees per hectare. So we have 2 measures of stress, one provided by the salt stress and the other by density of the stand, which increases competition. Now, we focused only on black mangrove, which is the species that is dominating overall the stands we worked on, and because it is quite tolerant to a wide range of salinity. And to understand the implications at the neighborhood scale, we also estimated the neighborhood asymmetry, which is an index of competition that is not exactly including the own size of the target tree. So it's more a measure of how big and how even spaced the neighbors are within the target tree. So neighborhood asymmetry is bigger when the neighbors of a target tree are bigger and are located more in one side of the spatial arrangement. What we found is that overall grafted trees tend to be taller than non-grafted trees, and of course smaller trees are mostly non-grafted, but as stem diameter increases we have an increasing frequency of grafted trees, where the slenderness, which is a measure of or an indicator of tree stability, is increasing with grafted trees. So that means leaner trees are more susceptible to wind dynamic throw, right? And the slenderness of any given tree decreases as the tree grows. So small trees are very spindly, are very thin, they are trying to reach the light, they are investing more resources first in height rather than in girth. And when they have reached the canopy, they can invest in a stem diameter, right? So a bigger tree is expected to be less slender than a smaller tree. That's why we see this downward trend. The interesting thing is that for grafted trees, we have higher slenderness than for non-grafted trees at the highest stem diameters. So that means that there might be a mechanical stability compensation for grafted trees that allows them to withstand higher heights without higher investment in stem girth. So what we find is that big trees are either grafted or have very small neighborhood asymmetries, and that can be seen in both graphs. Now, what is controlling the probability of grafting? We know from other studies that root grafts are associated with the stem diameter. So the bigger the stem diameter, the higher the probability of grafting. But in our study, we find that smaller stem diameters are more likely to graft when they are under higher stress. So higher stand density and higher salinity especially combined, increase the probability of grafting of trees that are smaller, which is already suggesting there might be a benefit from root grafts for trees. And when we see the distribution function of the network properties, we find that they might follow a power law distribution. That would mean that root grafts are not following a random process, but this cannot be fully accepted because we cannot reject random network formation. This means trees are not necessarily choosing which neighbors they will graft to. This might be a random process related to how close is the neighbor or how genetically compatible they might be. What is quite interesting is that the properties of the networks are changing with increasing environmental stress. So remember, I was telling you node degree is the number of trees a given tree might be connected to. If we average the node degree of each member within a network, we have the average node degree, right? So for low salinity and mid salinity, at the lowest stand densities, we found the highest average node degree, which is about 2. That means between one tree can be connected between 1 and 2 other trees at low stand density, but it is much lower at higher stand densities and higher salinities, where we found the lowest average node degree. That is, any given tree will be connected to less than 1 other tree. Nevertheless, the number of groups increases. So at higher densities and higher salinities, we find smaller groups, but many more groups. And at the right bottom hand of this slide, you can see the network topologies of a low density and low salinity stand and the highest density and highest salinity stand. You can see what happens here. At low density and low salinity, we have only 4 networks, but 2 of those networks are connecting away a lot of trees. While in the highest salinity and stand density, we have many networks, many small groups of trees. This is quite interesting because it has been found that for cooperative groups, smaller groups render greater benefits, and also cooperative behavior is much more advantageous when resource scarcity occurs at a temporal scale. So there is an heterogeneous distribution of resources that will make it more cost effective to be a cooperator. But it has also been found that the structure of the networks can facilitate cooperation. So for cooperation to be successful, the benefit needs to be greater than the cost. Every cooperator is paying a cost for cooperation. Now the benefit needs to be greater for expenditure to be advantageous, right? So in network topologies, there are some network structures that are allowing this benefit to be greater than the cost. And interestingly, that found by Allen is suggesting network topologies that facilitate cooperation, that are the ones in the middle, are very similar to the networks that we found in our highest environmental stress. So what can be deducted from here is that, at least at some level, the root networks in mangroves are facilitating resource exchange. Maybe not all the root grafts we found are functional, but some of them should be functional in order to create this pattern, because it's just the changes in these topologies along the environmental stress gradient are suggesting that there are underlying mechanisms that are selecting for optimal group sizes for cooperation to be a benefit. So forming root grafts is a costly process, right? It requires investment of resources, and it's actually been found with this study that found increased root growth rates on grafted pines. When trees are forming the grafts, the growth rates reduce dramatically. It is only when the grafts are fully formed that the growth rates increase. So it's quite expensive to form a root graft. Now, once it's formed, it better be working, right? In any case, there is still many open questions about this topic, and it might have especially great implications for mangrove ecosystems, which are especially recognized and valued for their coastal protection services. Living in a non-stable sedimentary environment, subject to wave surges and tropical storms, there has to be an adaptation that allows these trees to keep standing and withstand these dynamic forces. But there are also other implications in case this would be functional root grafts. Are they modulating water use efficiency? Are they helping redistribute water resources within the network? If one tree is located at a higher salinity microenvironment, can it receive fresh water from a grafted neighbor that has higher access to fresh water? These questions still remain unanswered, and we are convinced that this project should stimulate this type of ecophysiological research and look into the ecological implications of root grafts, especially within wetland forests or under the scope of environmental change. So this is a fantastic opportunity to explore these sort of questions, and it's probably applicable to many terrestrial forests in terms of drought and climate change, for example. This project has been founded by the Volkswagen Foundation. Thank you all for listening to me. If you have any questions, I will be here for a while to answer if possible. Cheers.